these three circles here, right? Just everybody's okay? Good. All right. Good morning to members of the media. Thank you for joining us in our Sunday morning media conference. There are a number of issues that we want to address that are affecting citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. But before I speak to those issues, let me, on behalf of MSJ, extend condolences to the family of two outstanding patriotic journalists who passed away over the last week or so. And of course to all members of the media fraternity on the loss of Raul Pantin and Marcia Henville. Both of them were very important patriotic journalists who were never afraid to speak their mind and write what they believed to be true and correct. And Raul, of course, was an older person and perhaps lived, the proverbial 70. Marcia, on the other hand, was considerably younger and died under very tragic circumstances. But both of their deaths have left a void in the media world, which we hope will be filled by other committed patriotic journalists. So we want to express our condolences to the families of both Raul and Marcia and to the media fraternity at this time on behalf of the MSJ. We also lost another patriotic citizen this last week, Richard Braffett, who was very well known also wrote a column regularly in the newspapers, but was better known for his work in sport and in culture and so on. And Richard loved his country dearly and contributed in very many ways to the upliftment of his fellow citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, in particular young people involved in sport and in the arts. And we want to express our condolences to his widow and his daughters and other members of his family. Now, last week the MSJ held a very successful regional conference, the first ever Caribbean sub-regional meeting of the Sao Paulo Foro. Unfortunately, we didn't get any coverage of that event in the media. I didn't see anything written about it in the newspapers, not a photograph, although we had both a press conference and we also had the formal opening open to the media. And we will send you the final declaration sometime later this week and hope that this very important meeting of political parties of the Caribbean, supported of course by the Secretariat of the Sao Paulo Foro, the Workers' Party of Brazil, and the Secretariat of the Central American and Caribbean Group, the FMLN of El Salvador, were very present, and other parties from Latin America, that we would get some coverage of this meeting which the MSJ hosted. It was a major breakthrough for the MSJ and also for the Sao Paulo Foro itself, which had never had a formal meeting in any country in the English-speaking Caribbean in the 25 years of existence of the Foro. So we will share that information, not this morning, but via sending you the statement, and we certainly hope that the media reports to the people of Trinidad and Tobago on these events because they are important given what is happening, for example, in Panama later this week with CELAC. Nine governments in CELAC, their parties are members of the Sao Paulo Foro, and only the MSJ has a direct relationship with those political parties that are in government throughout Latin America. And so this is a major development. But specifically this morning, we want to deal with relating to the state of the Republic. As you know, the MSJ's position is that the First Republic is finished, that it's time for the Second Republic. And we will constantly address matters that are affecting Trinidad and Tobago and citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to demonstrate why we are saying very definitively that the First Republic is finished and it's time for a Second Republic. The first issue that we want to address is related to governance, and specifically with respect to the Parliament and the judiciary. On Friday last, there was a private member's motion brought to censure Minister of Government, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Larry Hawaii, related to his functioning as CEO of First Citizens Bank some years ago. Now, we are not this morning debating the merits or demerits of the motion or of Mr. Hawaii's performance as CEO of First Citizens or his performance as Minister of Finance. That is not what the MSJ is addressing this morning. We want to address the fundamental issue of governance and the fact that our institutions of state are in crisis and are not serving the interests of our people. Let me repeat. The institutions of state, specifically the Parliament and the judiciary, are not serving the interests of the people. And we had this experience on Friday where the administration of justice, someone in the administration of justice, wrote to the Speaker of the House indicating that there was a particular matter before the civil courts of the country which relate in some way or the other to the performance of Mr. Hawaii when he was CEO of First Citizens Bank. And the Speaker of the House then used that correspondence to indicate that there will be serious restrictions on members of Parliament in speaking on that particular motion. We are very, very concerned that firstly, the debate or any debate in the Parliament could be frustrated, stymied, restricted by matters that have been brought by a member or other persons before the court in a civil proceedings. And let me repeat, in a civil proceeding. This is not now a criminal matter before the courts. As you know, in criminal matters before the High Court, there is judge and jury. And the judiciary has a very well-established principle and set of rules related to matters that are sub judice. That is, that they're before the courts. So that the media is restricted on reporting on certain matters and people are prevented from speaking to certain matters, because when things become in the public domain, it possibly could influence a juror, bearing in mind that a juror is an ordinary member of the public, an ordinary citizen, who is not trained in law, etc., and therefore could perhaps be influenced by what he or she reads or hears or sees reported in the media. And so the sub judice rule is to try to protect the integrity of the judicial process and ensure that juries are not influenced by anything outside of the evidence which is presented in court and tested by way of examination and cross-examination. However, civil proceedings are a horse of a different color, because civil proceedings are heard and determined by a judge only. And as you know, just to give the practical example, in very high-profile cases, juries are often sequestered. That is, they are kept in a hotel for the duration of the trial so that they are not accessible by other persons who might speak to them and influence them and so on. But judges are not sequestered. Judges are quite free to move about, to read newspapers. Judges are given no directions whatsoever, because it is expected that judges, being high officers, judicial officers, are not subject to bias. That is the understanding. Because if a judge is subject to bias or is able to be influenced by what he or she reads in the newspaper, they ought not to be a judge in the first place. And so a debate in Parliament should not and ought not to be able to influence a judge hearing a matter with respect to defamation or otherwise, which is a civil matter. And we understand, for example, that there are major court decisions, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but related, that would be relied upon by the courts of Trinidad and Tobago as precedent and so on, which clearly state that judges ought not to be swayed and cannot be swayed by what is reported in the media. And therefore, while the Parliament has rules not to engage in certain matters, the Parliament ought not to be stymied. And what we saw on Friday really now raises major issues where any member who is about to face censure before the Parliament could simply go and file a matter in the High Court and then use that matter before the High Court to frustrate a parliamentary debate. That's very dangerous. And it therefore is another indication of the fact that our Parliament is broken, is not working in the interests of people, because matters of concern to citizens cannot now be ventilated in the Parliament. And secondly, we need to get a very clear statement from those in charge of the administration of justice as to how this arose. Who initiated that letter from the judiciary or from the administration of justice to the Speaker of the House? Who wrote the letter? Who signed the letter? How was it initiated? Was it initiated by someone who is involved in the litigation, or was it initiated by somebody who was subject of the matter before the Parliament? Was it by some other person, a member of the legal fraternity, who was perhaps also implicated in the Securities Exchange Commission investigation into the CEMEX attempted takeover of TCL some 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever that matter was, and so on. So we want to get full disclosure from those in charge of the administration of justice and from the Speaker of the House with respect to this matter. Other than that, what is going to happen is that we have a crossing of the lines between Parliament and the judiciary, which crossing of the lines would result in the interests of citizens, which is what MSJ is concerned about, and justice not being served. This is a very, very serious matter. And we, you see, in the MSJ are pointing to a trend by this government to use the court system in a way to frustrate justice to citizens. And they're doing that, for example, in the arena of industrial relations, where NP has appealed the decision of the industrial court, which decision said that 68 workers were wrongfully dismissed and ought to be reinstated without loss of benefits and be given compensation. The Tech has appealed the decision of the industrial court with respect to a job evaluation matter. Petrotrin has appealed the decision of the industrial court with respect to a traveling allowance matter. So we have now, it seems, with this government in charge, this UNC government, the use of the court to frustrate justice, so that rather than the courts being the place where justice can be achieved, this government is using the court to frustrate justice by delaying the ultimate decision that will be in favor of citizens and workers. They did it with respect to the highway route matter. They've done it with respect to industrial relations matters. They did it with respect to the municipal police not benefiting from the payment of allowances. And that matter had to go all the way to the Privy Council. And we want to congratulate the municipal police as well as their attorney, Senior Counsel Ramesh Maraj, for winning that matter recently in the Privy Council. And this, therefore, is a horrific situation where this government is abusing office and this Attorney General manipulating the system in such a way that the courts are causing justice to be delayed and therefore justice to be denied. And we are very, very concerned about that, and this is why we are saying that the system is broken. This First Republic is not working in the interests of people. It is broken, and it's time for a Second Republic. We need real change, not exchange. The second issue that we want to address, and related to that of administration of justice breakdown, was the issue of the defamation case between the Attorney General and Dr. Keith Rowley, when the facts have now come out that Dr. Rowley's lawyers were not served with information coming out of the court. So that's just another example of the fact that the administration of justice system seems to be broken. Not getting into the merits of who is right and wrong in that matter. We're talking about the systemic problems of the breakdown of justice in this country, and what could appear to be the abuse of the system by certain people. The second one we want to deal with is the economy. Now, you know the government has this ad campaign running all over the place. Your government working for you. MSJ wants to say categorically this morning, this government is not working for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The government is not working. Let me repeat that, because the phone rang a moment ago. Let me repeat that. We want to say categorically this morning that this ad campaign, which says the government is your government working for you, is just PR, it is spin, it is not true. This government is not working for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And let me give you some examples of that. The government has been having some high-profile meetings with different organizations in the country and individuals representing companies and so on, dealing with the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, given falling oil prices and gas prices and commodity prices such as methanol and ammonia. And I repeat, ad nauseum in a sense, that MSJ spoke to this issue right here in this office on Sunday the 9th of November. That's more than 3 months ago. And the government was playing Santa Claus at that time. Kamala put on Santa Claus hat, giving out toys. The Minister of Energy had his head buried in the proverbial sand and said, don't worry, we have a gas economy. Well, all he talked about gas was really gas that is hot air. That's what it was. Pure hot air by the Ministry of Energy. Pure nonsense. Unadulterated nonsense. And 3 months later, the government, very belatedly, is now trying to show that it is in charge and in control. Well, this government is not in charge, not in control, has no vision, has no policy, no program. This country is leaderless in terms of the government. And those meetings were to try to demonstrate the Prime Minister is in charge. All of that is pure PR, pure PR. So that, for example, the Prime Minister instructed last week, following a meeting with business organizations, instructed Central Bank Governor to meet with Minister of Finance, and well, she can't instruct the Central Bank Governor. She instructed the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Trade and Investment to meet with the Central Bank Governor to address the issue of shortages of foreign exchange. A few days after that, we had at an AmCham discussion on the economic situation, members of the business community saying that in the presence of the Minister of Trade and Investment, that the foreign exchange situation is horrific at this point in time. In spite of the fact that the central bank sold $200 million into the financial system just a few days ago. That $200 million has been gobbled up by some people, and those who generally need it for their business transactions cannot get access for it, and ordinary citizens who want to travel and get access to foreign exchange cannot get access to foreign exchange. So, again, this government is not working for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, who need foreign exchange to do your legitimate business. The system is broken. And it is very clear that they have not a clue as to what to do, and so on. And one of the first things that would have to be done is to really remove the governor of the central bank, because he's incompetent and incapable and was put there out of loyalty and not based on competence. And secondly, something that the government cannot do, which is to restore confidence in the economy. And this government cannot restore confidence in the economy because they have no policies and no plans, and they're floundering and so on. And the lack of confidence is also generating capital flight, which is exacerbating the foreign exchange difficulties that the country is having, which situation is going to get worse as our earnings of foreign exchange declines due to falling oil and gas prices and commodity prices of methanol, ammonia, and steel. So the situation in Trinidad and Tobago is going to get worse given this government's absence of leadership and absence of vision and absence of policies and programs. So the business community is in serious trouble and is being affected by the economic crisis. But we want to speak as well to workers who are being affected adversely by the crisis. BPTT announced 2 days ago that it has initiated a voluntary separation of employment package in BPTT, and a number of workers are expected to go, or if BPTT, because Norm Christie was very clear, they have a footprint for the size of employment in the company. So what that means is that they have a target number of employees that they want to keep as permanent employees. If therefore the VSEP does not result in them achieving that target, there'll be retrenchment. So BPTT workers are faced with retrenchment. Petrotrin chairman has said that they're looking at cutting temporary and casual workers in Petrotrin, which of course would adversely affect Petrotrin's operations very significantly. So again, other oil workers are being faced with retrenchment. Then you have a major statement by UWE's principal, that the government owes UWE $200 million in gate. So already you have a situation where the government's commitments in terms of its expenditure are not being met and honored to education. And so the government will talk about, oh, we are committed to tertiary education for all. But that is talk, that is PR, that is spin. The real commitment is measured on whether the $200 million owing by the government in gate to the UWE is paid. And we are confident that UWE is not the only institution that government owes gate. There are other government, state tertiary institutions that are also owed gate money. And therefore, you have that impasse you had last week, the impasse with the lecturers represented by WIGOT. You also have all of the you have all of the technical, supervisory, administrative support staff represented by the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, whose negotiations at UWE are also outstanding. So you have this major problem of students now who themselves are going to suffer from the lack of services, not only grades not being submitted, but the students have to recognize that with the university not getting the monies from GATE, the university is not going to be able to provide the quality of service that students should get in terms of a quality university education. And so workers and students, lecturers are all being affected by the government's budgetary problems. And so this situation of falling oil prices has a direct and immediate impact on tens of thousands of people. Because there's 18,000 students at UWE, there are 15 or 1,800 workers, and another 500-600 or more lecturers. So already huge numbers of people are being affected at UWE. And there are other groups of workers who are also going to be affected as well. So we have a situation where many working people are facing real difficulties as a result of this situation. Sugar workers have been promised for years as part of their package when Caroni was closed down, land which they have not yet received. Some 10 years after Caroni has been closed down, sugar workers are yet to receive the land which was part of their package. And we are also concerned with the decision of the government to have sugar workers' leases being able to be sold in a secondary market to other people who may use that land for speculative activity rather than for agricultural purposes. And we also have the situation of cane farmers who the government had made commitments to and have not yet received those payments. So there are very many groups of workers, farmers and so on, who are being adversely affected by this government's failure to meet their obligations and commitments, and which obligations and commitments are going to recede further into the background as the economic crisis bites deep. And for this reason as well, we are saying this government has no vision, no clear purpose and direction. This country is leaderless, And this is another example of why we need real change, not PR, not spin, not exchange, but real change where we could move from this broken First Republic to a Second Republic where there could be justice, equity, and fairness for all. So I think we've said enough. And one of the radio stations obviously came off air, and somebody else was calling in. Sorry.
So you made a lot of statements as well. So let me get mention about the Prime Minister going to the United States yesterday. So what's your thought of?
Okay, sorry. Let me just mute this phone now. Just give me a moment just to mute. I had it on because of the.
Didn't make any mention of the Prime Minister making a trip yesterday to the USA to meet with the energy.
Yeah, well, very clearly, what is happening is that this is a power play by the United States. The United States has been marginalized in the region, particularly over the issue of energy, by the arrangements of CARICOM, in which Trinidad and Tobago was the lead with respect to an energy fund and so on, and more particularly by Venezuela through that country's introduction of the Petrotrin program, which helped very significantly most countries in the Caribbean. And the United States is now attempting to recapture political space in the Caribbean. That essentially, we have to understand this thing in the broader context of the power relations. They're trying to recapture political space. One was the decision by President Obama to, in discussion with President Castro, to reestablish diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States. And if you listen to President Obama's State of the Union address last week, he said very clearly that the change in the U.S. administration's policy towards Cuba and the reestablishing of diplomatic relations may enable the United States to regain some goodwill which it has lost in Latin America. Very, very clear about that. So understand Vice President Biden's meeting on energy. The United States now is in a position where it can actually be an exporter of oil and oil products, whereas historically from the 1940s onwards, the United States was a net importer of oil. And so given that it is possible that it could now export oil products, it can't export crude oil because there's a legal obstacle which has to be amended in the Congress that would allow it to export crude oil, but it can export products. The U.S. may very well be trying to counter Petrocaribe with its own policy at a time when Venezuela's economy is in difficulty because of the falling oil prices. So we have to understand it in that context, and one would hope that CARICOM would act as a unit, and individual CARICOM countries do not get picked off one by one in what is essentially a power play by the United States in the region. So let us understand that, and our position as MSJ is for regional integration. We have a very clear policy on regional integration, and therefore CARICOM must act as a unit, and there ought to be a CARICOM position in that meeting with the Vice President of the United States, and we must seek at this time with great urgency to deepen and strengthen the CARICOM process of integration, which is the Caribbean Single Market and Economy. Unfortunately, the CSME is going nowhere, as former Prime Minister Owen Arthur said publicly in an address last week. He said the Caribbean economies are floundering and the integration process is, my words now, the integration process is on the rocks. We have to change that. And unfortunately, Trinidad and Tobago, which is supposed to be a prime driver of the integration process because we have the largest and strongest economy in the Caribbean. We have the largest trade surplus with the rest of CARICOM countries. Trinidad and Tobago has no clear policy on Caribbean integration and on CARICOM. Okay? And therefore, MSJ, which has a clear policy on integration, could provide the leadership in CARICOM that is necessary for the strengthening of CARICOM to deal with the power plays at this time. The second meeting that the Prime Minister is attending is an important process of regional integration. known as CELAC, which is really all the countries of this hemisphere with the exception of the United States and Canada. And so it is very much the integration of the southern western hemisphere from Mexico down to the tip of Argentina. And so this is a very important process of integration, and one hopes that the Trinidad and Tobago government and CARICOM have a very clear policy position of strengthening the integration process in this hemisphere. Because with South-South integration in terms of economic and trading and investment relations, we can in fact come out much stronger as a Caribbean region. But we do not know what exactly the details of Trinidad and Tobago's policy is with respect to CELAC, apart from the normal rhetorical statements that are made.
Do you think that CARICOM leaders could take the Prime Minister seriously when the first statement she made when she came into office is that Trinidad and Tobago is not an ATM?
I think there has been from then to now a weakening of the relations between Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of CARICOM, and this has contributed in no small part to the fact that CARICOM has not advanced further with respect to the deepening of integration through the implementation of the Caribbean single market economy. It has also been exacerbated by immigration issues, where we have Jamaican and Guyanese nationals, for example, being sent back to those countries, perhaps even in violation of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which brought into being the CSME. So we have to have, as a country, a clear policy on Caribbean integration. I repeat that, but that starts with the party in government having a clear policy on integration. And the UNC has no clear policy on integration. Hence the foolish statements that are made, and hence the lack of integration that is taking place.
About the MSJ being absent for the rest of the union with the wages negotiation with Prime Minister last week?
MSJ is a political party, and we are very separate from trade unions. Okay? So we could not attend any meeting that the Prime Minister would have of trade unions. All right? So it's very clear. The trade unions will decide in their own right as trade unions whether they wish to attend or not attend. The MSJ is not involved in the decision-making of trade unions, even as a number of individual leaders of trade unions are active members and leaders of the MSJ. But the two are separate entities with separate decision-making processes. But let me say that on behalf of the MSJ, let me say that, I said it before the meeting with the Prime Minister, she called, said it before she made her statement, or just after she made her statement to the nation, that this government has no moral authority to bring together the national community to address the country's economic crisis. Has no moral authority because for 3 months the government sat and did nothing while oil and gas prices fell. And they ought to have made a clear statement much earlier. And if you go look back at the track record of the government, way back in 2010, I myself proposed to the Prime Minister in a private meeting I had with her, and that was repeated not by me but by trade union leaders from the J2M, formally to her in a meeting, of a process of bringing together business and labor and the government in an effort to deal with the economy and to get it out of recession and back on growth in a way that there'll be equity and fairness for all. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance at the time, their response was non-existent. It was a non-existent response. You had one meeting with trade unions, one meeting with business organizations, but that was pure PR. Nothing came out of it. So, and then the government has engaged in wanton spending. $450 million live sport, and all kinds of other activities, unbudgeted, wanton spending. The Auditor General has spoken about expenditure that is unauthorized, over budget, over time expenditure. So this government has no moral authority to be able to bring this country together. They've lost all the political goodwill that enables a government to bring the people together. Look at this, I mentioned the foreign exchange situation, the attacks on workers. How can you ask and get business people to be confident when you are messing around with the exchange system? How can you get workers and trade unions to buy into a program going forward when you are dismissing workers and then appealing the decision of the industrial court? The two are contradictory. They have no moral authority. And that is why this country needs clear, visionary leadership that is prepared to challenge the status quo and bring about real change. Yes, for sure, because once the energy sector, which contributes about 40% of GDP, 90% of foreign exchange earnings, 30% or 35% of government revenue, once the energy sector loses 30% of its revenue, then the economy will be affected. We will go into a recession. There's no doubt about that.
Experience in the oil field. How hard do you think it will hit Trinidad?
How hard, sir?
It will hit Trinidad.
Well, the problem is that in two parts. Firstly, a recession can hit Trinidad and Tobago, will hit Trinidad and Tobago. But it will hit different people differently. For us, our concern is, how does it affect the ordinary man and woman? In the past, what happened was that the burden of adjustment fell on the backs of ordinary people. Workers lost their jobs, people had their pay cut, lost COLA, people lost their homes, people could barely find enough money to put food on the table the next morning, people had to migrate, mothers migrated to try to work abroad to send food and money for their children back home who were being supervised by grandparents, and those young people then got totally disillusioned with the system. They had no support by their family or community, and many of them ended up in violence and gangs. In other words, the social problems of today can be traced back to the way in which the burden of adjustment of the collapse of the oil boom of the 70s affected workers, poor people in this country. And we have never recovered from that up to now. We have another major crisis. We are going to exacerbate the social situation by many, many times. And the lives of ordinary people will be affected. And this is what MSJ is speaking to. How are people's lives going to be affected by this thing? As I pointed to BPTT, Petrotrin, UE workers, and others whose lives are being directed immediately, and other lives will be affected subsequently. And that is wrong. And part of the discussion, you see, the government is not just to hear what people have to say in a PR and the cameras show everybody smiling and so on. That is not the issue. The issue of leadership is to have a real discussion about how do we get out of the crisis, first of all, and second of all, how is the burden going to be shared so that those who can least manage are not affected as much as those who have 3 Range Rovers and whatever else in the garage packed up.
What caused the problem? Or what has caused the problem? You say, what is the problem? Your opinion. How can we rectify the problem? How can it
Okay, you're asking for another discussion which is not the subject of our press conference this morning. Let me be very clear. We have a very detailed policy document called 21 Visions for the 21st Century, which we have shared with many. We have already had meetings with several business organizations, the Energy Chamber and the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber. We are setting up meetings with other chambers. We have met with the Joint Trade Union Movement and a number of trade unions individually. And we have shared our policy perspectives. But for me to give you that, it's more than a press conference. Okay? But we have had a very clear examination of what the problems are. We have addressed in that issues of government taxation, of managing our foreign exchange, of building investor confidence, of transforming CEPEP into community-based cooperatives, not retrenching CEPEP workers, but empowering them in cooperatives. We have talked about a whole range of policy strategies to diversify the economy. So yeah, I could only give you the bullet points in that regard. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any others? Gregory Fernandez, PRO, Clyde Calendar is International Relations Officer, Atkins Vidal, Party Organizer, all members of the party executive as well. Yeah?
You up here, right? You up here? Radio?
Still on the radio is off. Yeah.
You
Hey, you don't know who has free radio was?
At least two of them are.
I pass in water gardens at night. I see a lot of people pass that. And the other,